We're going to continue our series that I've entitled Unwrapping Christmas. And a question for you to get us started today. Have you ever experienced family drama? Let's just pray right now and go home. Let's just leave it right. Family drama. Oh, Lord. Here's the scene. Here it is. All right. So, Christmas time, families getting together. You have a conversation with your spouse in the kitchen before everybody arrives that, okay, now, Bill, you understand. Remember, we're not going to go to this topic. We're going to steer clear of that. And when Uncle John and Aunt Martha show up, we're just going to stay away from that topic because we know from prior experience where that's going to lead us. So the doorbell rings, and here's Uncle John and Aunt Martha, and families gathered, and we're all in the house, and the Christmas songs are playing, and it's a great atmosphere, and the cookies have been baked, and we're just ready for an awesome time. And we sit down in the living room, and just as we sit down and get comfortable with a cup of coffee and a cookie in hand, all of a sudden, Uncle John asks the question. You know what I'm saying? The question. And at that point, it's game on. Right? You with me? It feels like, now it may not actually happen, but it feels like as soon as it comes out of Uncle John's mouth and everybody understands from prior experience where this question tends to go, it tends to be a time where the love of Jesus kind of tends to go right out the door, right? And so you're sitting there, it feels like everybody's eyes come right here. How are you going to respond to this moment? Because depending on how I respond or how you respond at that setting, at that moment, it's going to set the tone for the rest of the visit, right? Oh, Lord, help us. So, interesting to get us started. Now, you just picked an awesome day to come to church. Because I get to say to us some things that I've just been dying to say for some time, and I get to package them in a sermon, and we'll see if you come back next Sunday. I hope you do. All right. So here we go. I was reading a book recently, and in this book, there is what is referred to as the Cranky Code. The Cranky Code. And it's written by a gal named Leslie Charles. Here is her version of the Cranky Code. It goes something like this. I am entitled to what I want when I want. And we just all said amen right there, huh? Right? Okay. She goes on. I have the right to be impatient or rude when other people are behaving stupidly. And everybody said, absolutely, right? Okay. I am a taxpayer. I own part of this road, and I have the right to drive as fast as I want. Or as slow. Sometimes. Okay. Yeah. I not only have the right to pursue happiness, I deserve to be happy, and I'll do whatever it takes to achieve it. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Huh? Yeah. The Cranky Code. I'm too busy to mince around with false politeness and should be able to tell people exactly what I think without having to worry about their feelings. Getting painful in here. Let's just practice an ouch right now. Ouch, okay. One more. I must be more in the know than anyone else so that I can stay one up on them. Otherwise, they may take advantage of me. Have you ever met anybody that maybe they don't call it the Cranky Code, but just in action and thought and perspective and attitude and all that kind of stuff? Have you ever met anyone that you would suspect are living according to the Cranky Code? Just look up here. Don't look at your neighbor, right? Don't give him an elbow. It's like he's talking about you right now, okay? What happens when we live according to the Cranky Code? What happens? Well, I think if we live according to the Cranky Code, we position ourselves for power encounters. Have you ever experienced that? Head-on-head, collision course, one person against the other person. It's a direct in your face, and whoever is, quote, the strongest at that given moment, whoever has the ability to overcome, it's kind of like an arm wrestling match, and whoever can lean into it the hardest is going to come out, so to speak, on top. But unfortunately, we understand that the reality of that is actually both lose. There's really no winner in the power encounter, right? It really damages, ultimately. What happens when we live according to the cranky code? We experience the consequences of our attitudes and actions. And would you agree with me that there are always consequences? Absolutely. Every decision, every word that comes out of my mouth, every attitude that I hold on to, every time that I engage someone, it's going to have consequences, either good or bad. And also, when we live according to the cranky code, obviously, based on today's sermon title, I think we're going to encounter family drama. Drama. Yeah, just trying to help you out here. Getting you ready for Christmas. Ho, ho. Joy to the world. Here we are. Yeah, help us, Bill. A little different approach today. I actually have two scripture verses that I want to present to you for your thought, your consideration. And initially, they would seem to compete with each other at first observation. They seemingly compete. The first scripture is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. The Apostle Paul is writing a church in a place called Corinth. This church is just absolutely messed up. Can anybody relate? Anybody here have issues? Just look at me and just say, Bill, I have issues, right? I'm with you. Okay, yeah. This church had major issues. I mean, they were fighting. They had division. They were griping at each other. They were involved in all sorts of things that were just not good. Pride, they were even having lawsuits against each other. And the Apostle Paul writes a letter to them. And in the letter, he says this, 1 Corinthians 13, verse 11, I believe it's on the back of your bulletins here, or the reference is, when I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man or an adult, I put childish ways behind me. Wow. Okay. Pretty pointed, pretty straightforward. Now, in contrast, or so to speak, kind of, it seems in contrast, Jesus with his disciples, they're on a road traveling. Jesus is walking. He hears kind of a buzz behind him, a conversation, a dialogue that's taking place between the disciples. Jesus picks up on what they're talking about. They get to their destination. He sits down and he goes, hey guys, by the way, what were you talking about there on the road as we were walking? No one wanted to fess up. No one wanted to come forward and say what they were actually talking about, but it comes out that they were actually talking about who is the greatest, who's the top dog in the church, who's the one in the kingdom of God who's going to be top rung. And Jesus looks at them, and of all things, he says this. In Matthew 18:3, he brings a little child to him and he says, I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Interesting, put these two scriptures side by side. On one hand, you have the Apostle Paul saying, when I was a child, I did all these things, but I had to grow up. And then on the other hand, you have Jesus saying we have to be like a little child. So who do we go with? I mean, what do we do? Are we supposed to be not like children, or are we supposed to be like children? Well, let me just have the benediction prayer right there and let you ponder that. We'll just send you home with that question. No, I'll try to help us. I think, in your notes here on the back of your bulletins, write this down to get us started. I think the truth found in these scriptures is that we must both grow up and grow down. Did Pastor Bill just tell us to grow up? I've been wanting to tell you that for a long. Merry Christmas! We must both grow up and grow down. Let me unpack that a little bit. First of all, the thought of growing up. Let's start with the Apostle Paul and his encouragement to the church. In your notes, once again, write this. Growing up is realized within the context of intentional love. When Paul is talking about becoming an adult, we have to understand that contextually, he packages this in what we refer to as the love chapter. It's the chapter in the Bible that talks more about love than probably any other chapter concentrated in the Bible. So Paul is putting this statement, and he has packaged it in the thought of love. He says this in verses 4 through 8. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude, not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts. It always hopes. It always perseveres. Love never fails. So the attributes of love, as Paul describes this here in these verses 4 through 8, actually, I believe, reveal the places where we must grow up to become adults. And I'm reading a lot of books, and I have stacks of books, and I know it's just me, but a book that I'm currently reading is actually dealing with the topic. The premise of the book is what he refers to as emotional discipleship. It's an interesting concept. I've never heard a pastor or a preacher speak on this concept of emotional discipleship, but the whole thought of the book is that we can have intellectual knowledge and we can understand principles and concepts, but at a heart level, at an emotional level, we can still remain children. And he is saying that to be able to fully experience growth, spiritual maturity in Jesus, our emotions have to grow up. Our emotions have to mature. If you were to take an assessment of your emotional age right now, your feelings, your heart, your thinking, what age would you rate yourself? Are you a child? Are you an adolescent? Are you a young adult? Where are you at emotionally? It's an interesting thought. Hard question. What that question requires us to do is go inside, take a reflective look, sit down, take a step, so to speak, back, and ask myself, are there places in my life emotionally where I have stalled, plateaued, or become stuck? Sometimes experiences in life, sometimes family drama makes us stick emotionally. You tracking with me? So I think this is exactly what the Apostle Paul is dealing with, is he's saying all of these situations that are happening in this church, all of these issues are really springing forth from a heart issue, an emotional standpoint, where people have allowed themselves to become stuck or plateaued at a certain emotional development stage, and they're not growing beyond that. And Paul is saying it's time to grow. It's time to mature in our emotions. Do you see the connection there of spirituality and emotional growth? Are you seeing that with me? So as we unpack this, look at this verse with me again. Paul says, love is patient, love is kind. Now, bear with my analogy, but I think that is a set where there is a subset of descriptors now underneath that. Are you tracking with me, mathematical people? Just love me. Just love me, all right? Top of the rung, patience and kindness. Underneath that now, the contributors to that. Growing up in patience and kindness are accomplished as I intentionally choose to not be envious, to not boast, to not be proud, to not be rude, to not be self-seeking, not be easily angered, not keep record, and not delight in evil. Those things, when I choose to intentionally grow up in that way, those parts of my heart, my emotions, to not envy, not be boastful, proud, on and on and on, those things enable me to be able to grow up into patience and to kindness. I have to confess to you that I don't have a good handle on those. I am sometimes the most impatient person, and if my family were here, they would be yelling and jumping up saying, amen, right now. But thankfully, they're not here today, so I can just confess to you and move on. But I have a struggle with that. Sometimes usually I do pretty good, but there are just times. There are just situations, and in a family drama situation, sometimes what comes to me is not the love of Jesus. Sometimes what comes to me is impatience, and I look and I don't say it, but I think it and I feel it. Why don't you just grow up? Why don't you just get over it and move on? Am I the only heathen here this morning that feels and thinks those things, right? Come on. Sometimes I think that about the people who are the closest to me, my family, my loved ones. And it's not that I don't love them, it's just sometimes I get impatient and I have to really work hard at not being rude, not keeping an internal checklist. Come on. How many keep record? How many that internal record, that checking it off? Oh, there's Uncle John again. Aunt Martha again. They said it, they went there, I knew they were going to do it. How many times do we have to go over this same issue over and over? When are they just going to move on? Pray for me. Growing up requires me to live according to the Christ code and put away the cranky code. Anybody agree with that? I want you to look at this verse one more time, though, here in 1 Corinthians 13. Paul outlines this set of characteristics, these virtues, these values that we have to work at. It's patient, kind, not envy, don't boast, all of these things. But towards the end of that, he also says that love always protects. Can I say, and in your notes, write this down, growing up also includes protecting. To protect. And how do we protect? Well, if in my home with my girls, if I felt that someone was trying to break in and get access to the house, I would do everything within my power to protect them and the house. It's just normal, right? That makes sense. I mean, I wouldn't just allow someone, if I knew that they were coming in and if I knew their intent and I was well aware of that, I wouldn't just sit back and say, well, go ahead, do what you want. I would take an active role in protecting those who I love, right? Is that fair? Same way here, locking the door and keeping out the thief. Jesus said the enemy of our soul is a thief. He comes to steal, kill, and to destroy. But Jesus said he came to give life and life to the full. How do we lock the door, so to speak, and keep out the thief? Well, first of all, I think we need to trust Jesus to give us the strength and the courage to say no. Did you know that it's okay to say no? Did you know that it's needed at times to say no? Let me give you an example. In the case of physical abuse, emotional abuse, I'm talking in the topic of family drama, but when that drama turns to a position of becoming abusive and harmful to you or to your family, it's like allowing a thief to come in, and at that point, a firm no needs to be said. Some people feel guilty saying that. Some people, well, Bill, that makes me self-centered. That makes me selfish. I don't know that I... And did you also know that when you start saying that word no and putting it in place and enforcing it, did you know that somebody probably that's very close to you will always try to test that? They'll always push back on that. They'll see how far that you're going to let them go. Are you going to hold that in place? Are you going to keep that there? Or I'm going to test that. I'm going to push against that. And Jesus can help us as we trust Him for courage and faith and boldness and strength in His life within us. He can enable us to say no and hold the no in place when needed. Is that good? I mean, I think that's probably worth the day right there. How do we lock the door and keep out the thief? How do we protect? We protect by hoping in the transformational power of Jesus to still change someone's heart. Have you ever gotten to a place where Uncle John and Aunt Martha come in and you just got to that place in your heart and your life to where you've said to your spouse or to your close family, that's just the way they are. That's just Uncle John. That's just Aunt Martha. They've been that way as long as I can. I mean, that's just them. I mean, they're just going to be the way they are. They're going to be that way this Christmas. They're going to be that way next Christmas. Don't even worry about. And I wonder sometimes if in the process of that thinking, if we limit what Jesus can do in somebody's life. Could Jesus still break through? Can He still touch a heart, a life, and change? Now, You got to keep all this, connect the dots here, because what I'm saying is even in the midst of saying no when no's are needed, we still maintain hope that Jesus can change a life. It's both and, not either or. We put the no in place for protection, but in addition, we continue to pray and believe that Jesus can change a life. We don't give up on them, but we protect ourselves in the process. How do we lock the door and keep out the thief? How do we protect? Is we persevere in prayer for those who need to experience the truth of Jesus, and we provide a spiritual covering for our home. Jesus said it this way, 2 different places. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." How are you doing on that? How are you doing on that? Are you praying for those who mess with you? Are you praying for those who give you a hard time? Are you praying for Uncle John and Aunt Martha? Jesus also said, "Bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you." In other words, could it be where I don't even want to answer the door? I look through the little thing there, or in my case, I go to the bathroom and I open the blinds to see, because I don't have the little, okay, so I go to the bathroom and I close the door, turn the light on, turn the fan on, and I stand with one foot in the tub as I look out the blinds to see if it's Uncle John and Aunt Martha, and if I really want to open the door. Sometimes I just don't even want to go to the door and answer the door. Sometimes it just, Jesus help me to leave the bathroom and just go answer the door. Sometimes that's just a step of faith right there, right? Okay, so I'm getting to the door, and I open the door, and I open the door, and at that moment, standing in front of them, sometimes it could be a phone call. I don't even want to answer the phone. I look at the caller ID, and I see who it is, and I know that if I answer this call, it's probably going to go here, right? Do I answer? Do I not answer? If I don't answer now, they're just going to call back later. I might as well answer and get it over with. Just put up with it, endure it, get the call over with. Now, this is just me. I know none of you, this is just me, right? Okay. Sometimes, when it's gone so long, the same way, consistently, it's a challenge to be loving and kind, and then also protect on a phone call, with the answering of a door. Are you with me? So Paul says we need to grow up and become adults. Sometimes the most adult thing I can do is answer the phone and be absolutely honest. And not be attacking, but just say no where no is needed. And stay loving at the same time. I don't know your situations, but I just sense in my gut this morning that there could be someone here today that you're experiencing even a situation that it could be abusive in nature, and I just want to encourage you, it's okay to say no. It's okay to say no. Jesus doesn't expect you, it's not an act of love to let someone come in and harm you, spirit, soul, or body. That's not loving. Let me go on here. The second verse that I brought to us this morning has to do with Jesus' interaction with his disciples. Remember with me that as he brings this little child in front, and I think Jesus probably wraps his arms around him, sets him on his knee. I don't know what it looked like, but he got this little guy here. This little guy, he didn't know what was up. He didn't know what Jesus was after. He's just there, and Jesus takes the little child and he brings him close to him. He hugs him in. Here's the disciples scrapping and all this kind of stuff about who's going to be the greatest. And here's what Jesus didn't say. Jesus, in response to their question, who's the greatest, he didn't say kings or queens. He didn't even say pastors. Thank you. He didn't say the rich, and he didn't even say the poor would be the greatest. Of all things, he brings a little child, and he says, take a look at this little child. And Jesus says, unless you humble yourself like this child, Matthew 18:4. Unless you humble yourself, humbling yourself will be the greatest in the kingdom. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Why would Jesus say that? Well, just in contrast, like Paul indicates there are things and areas we need to grow up in, I think you could say it kind of like this. Jesus is saying there are ways that we need to become more childlike. Childlike in the sense of we need to be three things: receptive, teachable, and humble. Why? Children, receptive. To be receptive, though, is not only to hear and understand, but to put into obedient action. Did you grab that? It's one thing to hear, it's another thing to do. It's one thing to know in your head, but it's another thing to engage your heart and have your hands engage into obedient action. So Jesus has this little child, and he's saying, if you want to be the greatest in God's kingdom, be like this child. Be receptive to what God has for your life. He was teaching his disciples that in order to be great in the kingdom, we have to be willing to choose to receive the position of a servant. Jesus said, the greatest among you will be the servant of all. Obedient action is always based on love. Jesus said it this way in John 14, if you love me, you will obey what I command. I think we can say then the extent to which I obey the commands of Jesus is the extent to which I am, quote, growing down to become like a little child. Jesus is not saying, it's really not a competition, it's actually complementing what the Apostle Paul taught. It's not in opposition to each other, it's actually working together. Paul is saying we need to grow up to be loving. Jesus is saying we need to become more childlike by being more loving. It's both and. They're working together to give us a picture and an understanding that we need to grab a hold. If we're going to get away from family drama, it has to start here. With me, my heart, my head, my hands, how I speak, how I think, how I function, how I operate. And Jesus modeled the life of a servant. Remember with me, Jesus in a setting where here his disciples are seated, and he walks up to them, and of all things, he puts around his waist a towel, and he bends down, and he removes the shoe or the sandal off of the person's foot, and he takes a basin of water, and he washes the dust and the dirt off, and he takes the towel, and he wipes the foot clean, and he says, what was he doing with that? Did Jesus just love feet? Did he have a foot thing? I mean, what's the deal with that? I mean, No, Jesus was giving an example of what it looks like to be a servant. If you want to be great, if you want to be someone that God looks to and smiles about, serve people, reach out to people, extend yourself, maybe even to places that aren't comfortable. But you have to make the connection here. It's the both and of both scriptures complementing each other. As we serve, we do it in a safe way. If you love me, you will obey my commands. Two other things here real quick. Children are receptive, children are teachable. In your notes, write this down. Often the teachable moments come in the form of correction. How many like correction? Oh, discipline, correction. In Hebrews chapter 12, it says this, our fathers disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Discipline resulting in peace. Discipline resulting in growth. Discipline resulting in maturity. Discipline resulting in emotions growing up into the fullness of Jesus. Discipline that helps me to be able to grow more like Jesus himself, so that when I interact with Uncle John and Aunt Martha and invite them into my living room, and Uncle John asks the question and puts the game in motion, and I'm sitting there, it's the discipline of Jesus within me that enables me to respond to Uncle John and everybody there in an emotionally mature way. For the disciples to receive the teaching of Jesus, they had to be willing to receive his correction. How are you doing there? In your notes, write this down. Humility is the greatest asset that we can own. Humility. Dad always told me, he said, Bill, to be humble doesn't mean you're weak. Jesus wasn't weak. He said, meekness is not weakness. That's how Dad would say it. Jesus said, learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart. He said, meekness is not weakness. Humility, meekness, power under control. You have the ability to take their head off. You have within your strength, you could cut them 1,000 ways. You could make them see it, possibly, the way you would want them to see it, and damage and ruin the relationship in the process. But Jesus said, or Peter said this in 1 Peter chapter 5, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves under God's mighty hand that he may lift you up in due time. Watch. Cast all your cares, all of your anxiety. I have to say to you that this time of the year for many is probably a time that consists of anxiety and depression for many. It's a time of anxiety. It's a time of stress. It's a time of rushing and going here and there and trying to keep up with the schedule. And sometimes we can lose sight of the very meaning of this, and we get caught up into family drama, which not only is it coming from Uncle John and Aunt Martha, but I'm contributing to it as well myself. Oh, just smile at me. Have you ever realized that, or ever discovered it's never just one side? Come on now, help me out here. It's not just Uncle John and Aunt Martha, it's me as well. I mean, we're in the living room together. True? Humility is the greatest asset we can own. God opposes the proud but gives grace. Grace. To who? To the humble. Humility positions me for God's grace. It positions me for God's promotion. And humility positions me for God's care. How do we know we have further to grow down? We know that we need to grow further to become more like a child when we fight for our rights at the expense of our peace. Have you ever done that? Well, Bill, I deserve it. Oh, going back to the cranky coat. It's my right to have this. I'm entitled to have this. Could be very true, but sometimes our attitudes and our emotional immaturity positions us in a bad spot. How do we know we have further to grow down? Is when we resist God's discipline for what seems good to us. How do we know we have further to go? We resist humility as a possible option. Let me give you some practical applications, and we'll close with this. So back to the living room. Here we are. We have rehearsed beforehand what to say, what not to say. We have the mental script. We're prepared from prior experience of what to expect. So I'm sitting there. Dave walks in, and I know what I'm going to get with Dave. I just know, Dave is the way he is, right? And I've had experience with Dave. I'm going to try to love him like Jesus loves me. Whew, it's hard. He's just a hard guy to love. I got to love him in a way that he knows I love him. And at the same time, I feel that there could be, in my encounter with Dave, I just sense that there's going to be opportunity for me to stretch and grow. And I need Jesus' help to do that. I know that Dave's going to push a button in me. It's going to be his Christmas gift to me. Merry Christmas, Bill. It's going to push the patient button. And I'm going to have to make a decision right on the spot in the living room in front of God and everybody else. How do I do this? How do I walk this out? And as the words are forming, can I just say that sometimes you need to buy yourself a little space, a little time to process emotions, a little time to process words before you speak them, a little time to process thoughts before you just let them fly out. Maybe there'd be a good idea to have a patient kindness filter in your head, your heart, and your mouth so that, well, Bill, I can just say I'm sorry, and that's true. You can say, but it's out there. It's hard to get it back because people, whether we like it or not, a lot of times do keep track and do keep record. And there's another time Bill was unkind. Maybe if it's at all possible, maybe you need to redirect and not address the question at the moment. Maybe you need to buy yourself a little bit of time. Maybe you need to adopt a rule, if it's at all possible, at least 24 hours or maybe even a couple of 2 or 3 days to just get a little separation. Give yourself some time to go before Jesus and say, Jesus, would you help me with my emotions? Would you help me with my heart and my head and help me get into alignment? Jesus, I want to use this opportunity to be able to grow and become more loving, and I want to grow up, and I also want to grow, so to speak, down to become more like this little child. Jesus, I need your help to do that because I'm not really clearly seeing how to move forward in this situation and be pleasing to you. I know what I feel, I know what I want to say, but help me not go there. If it's possible. But here's the key to that. And this is the last thought for the day. So you buy yourself some time, and you take a few days, and you bow down in front of everybody and tie your shoe, because you don't like loose shoes. And you pull your pants up in front of the whole crowd, and that's on video, so you can see that on YouTube. What was I saying? You buy yourself some time. You put some separation in there. You go sort yourself out. You go stand in the bathroom, look out the blinds, turn the fan on, and you sort your emotions, okay, and you get yourself together. Here's the key. Re-engage. It's only one part of the equation. If you only go and sort yourself out, there's an opportunity that Uncle John needs to have the love of Jesus and the healing in his life, and maybe Jesus wants to speak through you to bring the love and the discipline and the correction that's needed in Uncle John's life. But if you never come back and re-engage, if you just put it under the carpet to trip over it later, which you know is going to happen next Christmas, and how many times do you want to relive this? What I'm saying is sort yourself out, but come back and re-engage. Don't take the attitude like, okay, well, I'm good. I got my heart in the right place. I'm growing. I'm strengthening. My emotions are coming up. But what about Uncle John? Could it be that Jesus wants to use your voice in a loving way to speak to his heart, to help him grow, so that this time next year, when Uncle John stands on the door and knocks, maybe the family drama looks a little different? Are you with me? Kelly's not here to protect herself. She went over to Seattle today to see our girls. I'm glad she could do that. I used to call her the quick draw. Rapid fire. Boom. We got married. I'm standing there just holy and godly. And they were hollow-tipped bullets. I'm telling you, man, they came. They go in clean and I'd say to her, I said, Kelly, man, wow, love you. Whew. I just need a little time. I got to process that. Wow, I've got, there's a lot of lead there. I need to kind of sort that out a little bit. And she'd say, okay, Bill, I love you too. You go take as long. In fact, she loved me so much, one day she even bought me my own thinking chair. I know, it's a gift. It's me. And I'd go sit in my thinking chair, and sometimes to many other people it would look like absolutely nothing is happening, but I'd sit there. And I'd think it through. And I'd reflect on the emotions, and I'd say, now how am I going to show godly leadership in this home? I'd process and I'd pray and I'd move on. And then the next time, when the guns flew, I found out, hey, that worked pretty good last time. I said, oh, Kelly, I just need time to process. I thought it worked before. Got a little rhythm going here, And here's what she said to me, because she loved me. She said, Bill, take as long as you need, process, but it's not fair to me for you to work it out and not come back and tell me what you worked out. It leaves me open, it leaves me unsettled, it leaves me spinning, it leaves me treading water. It's not fair to me. Thank Jesus that you worked it out. But all I'm asking, Bill, take as long as you need, but what I'm asking is that you come back and talk with me. She learned. I'm learning. 30 years later, we're still learning how to grow up and grow down. Are you with me? Bow your hearts with me this morning. Jesus, I pray that you would come in and forgive us. Forgive me of my sins. Forgive me, God, the times I've screamed and I've yelled. Forgive me, God, for the times that I've picked fights and been bitter and had a jealous heart. God, forgive me for the times that I've lived by the cranky code. Forgive me, Father, for the times when I've been the main voice to contribute into the family drama scenario. Help me to grow up. Jesus, I pray that you would show me the areas that I am childish, that my emotions have stalled and I'm emotionally immature. Help me see them. Give me the courage, Lord, to be able to address them and to become an adult. Help me to be also, God, to become more like this little child that Jesus talked about. Help me to be teachable. Help me to be receptive. Help me to stay humble. Help me, Father, to forgive people. Help me to not keep score. And Father, when Uncle John and Aunt Martha come over, help me to love them enough to both protect myself, but be used of you to speak your love into their lives. It's not comfortable. I'm not looking forward to it. I'm not quite sure what to say. But God, you give me the words. You give me the courage. And I pray for Uncle John and Aunt Martha. I pray, God, that you would help them to be receptive. In Jesus' name. Everybody said, amen.